Hi, Corey. Thank you for taking the time to talk to the People's Movies about your big screen debut, Big Boys. Firstly, what inspired you to write Big Boys and how much of yourself is in the story?
Yeah, I mean, Big Boys is very much based on experiences I had growing up as a closeted gay kid. Just like sort of figuring myself out, like facing some of like the internalized homophobia I had, like facing like unrequited crushes on friends or older teachers, like basically guys I couldn't have. Like, so there was like a lot of these like feelings boiling inside me, and for a long time I was sort of trying to figure out what the right package for that story was. And eventually it sort of came to me. I was like, oh, like a weekend camping trip with this sort of crush on this like cousin's boyfriend character is like contained enough and loaded enough to convey so many of like the experiences that I was wanting to put across on screen. Um, and then, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
No, how much of yourself did you choose to incorporate into the story as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some of me in here. I think some of the sort of giddiness of the character, some of the sort of eager to please kind of quality. I think some of the interests in like a more creative thing. Like Jamie's really into cooking. I was always really into filmmaking, um, and also just like he's a chubby kid with a crush on a chubby guy, and that was and is my story.
Yeah. And how did you approach balancing those different tones of humor and also vulnerability?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of new for me in some ways because I had grown up always making comedy, like just straight like sketches and like comedy short films and all of that. And so it was a new step for me to sort of lean more into a emotional, like dramatic, internal kind of tone. And I think it really helped that because it was so based on my own personal experiences, like that was like I had that North Star. I was like, oh, I really want to do justice to that experience, which I knew from talking to other people, like that's not just my experience. That's like a universal experience of coming to terms with your sexuality. But yeah, I also really wanted the movie to not be a bummer. Like I wanted it to be light and fun and have like a lot of humor and warmth in it. And so I think that we were always sort of figuring out that balance of like, does whatever joke is in this scene or in this moment like help move along the story? Does it like further our understanding of Jamie? Does it like give a necessary sort of like catharsis to an otherwise tense scene? Or does it like distract from this core story about Jamie's desire? And whenever it would distract, or even if it was funny, feel like it was like a detour, we would pull it out. And that was an interesting process, particularly in editing, of just like weeding out anything that we felt, yeah, was just not necessary.
Yeah, yeah. And Jamie's journeys yeah, explores identity in a really fresh and kind of nuanced way. What did you want to say about queerness and self-acceptance through his own experience?
Um, that it's hard. I think like that it's just really tricky and very private, and you're like contending with a lot of things at once. Like you're simultaneously dealing with like in terms of just like coming out to yourself, the point that Jamie's at, you're contending with these really strong feelings of desire that are propelling you towards the person you're attracted to. But then you're also dealing with the feelings of shame and self-consciousness around that desire and the questioning of like, should I even have it in the first place? Um, and should I be presenting myself in a different way? Should I be a more sort of typical guy? And so it's just like this sort of storm of different sort of conflicting motivations and feelings and pressures. And I think like that was something that I always wanted to capture in a movie. And I think a movie was the only way I really knew how to capture it.
Yeah, and casting is everything in a film like this. So, what was the casting process like, in your experience, and also finding your lead in Isaac? What qualities were you looking for in that role?
Yeah, I mean that so casting this was a combination of reaching out specifically to certain actors that we knew we really wanted to work with, like Taj Cross, who plays his older brother, and Emily Deschanel plays his mom, like Marion Van Kuyk, like who plays Erica, a girl he meets at a campsite, and then others were like these really happy surprises that we got from just casting a really wide net. And Isaac was one of them. Like Isaac, like just submitted a self-tape for this role, and the second we watched it, his was the first tape we watched. We just knew like this is his role. Like he just had such a sophisticated and nuanced understanding of like the character's internal life and was able to make that very clear to the audience, like what the character was feeling, but never in an obvious way. Like he could be very clear about the inner life, but would also do a really good job of sort of cloaking it or like throwing off the scent in a way that real people do, and especially real kids do, who, especially like a 14-year-old boy, like what could be more terrifying to him than being vulnerable? So I think that Isaac just really understood that, and sort of like just knew how to lean into it.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a beautiful use of nature and the outdoors throughout the film. What role did that play in setting up the and helping shape the emotional arc of the story?
Yeah. I think like the outdoors both worked as like a sort of safe place for Jamie, like away from home, where he could gain a sort of new perspective on himself. He's not around his normal school friends or his mom or his family or anything like that. He can just sort of explore new parts of himself and not feel like as watched as he might at home. But on the other hand, like I think like the woods presents new challenges for him, things he's not necessarily used to, like building a tent or like building a campfire, these sort of like traditionally masculine things that end up, while intimidating him at first, actually end up like giving him an opportunity to bond with Dan, his crush.
Yeah. And being both writer and director, did your vision evolve at all from the page to the screen during production? And were there any surprises that came up along the way?
Yes, totally. I mean, that was one of the best things about making this was each stage seeing this like morph into a slightly different movie and add things or subtract things that I never would have expected. I mean, it was one particularly surprising thing was to me at the beginning of the movie probably had like four scenes that got cut that I thought were going to be necessary to establish Jamie and his relationships, but ultimately it felt like we were getting, I think this is so much due to the performances, you're getting so much information in such a small, like a short period of time from these actors about who these characters are that we didn't end up needing all that extra stuff. And so, yeah, we ended up just chopping it out. And it was kind of a relief because it was like, okay, like the movie's still really moving, like that it wasn't necessary.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you hope that audiences and especially younger viewers take away from the experience of Big Boys?
Um, that like I guess that it's okay to struggle with this stuff, that it's very, very normal to have the kind of confusion and self-consciousness that Jamie has, and that you're not alone in that. I think that was such a difficult part of being that age myself, was just feeling like really alone in what I was experiencing and not seeing a lot of it like reflected back at me in media. And it would have been really comforting, I think, to see something like Big Boys because it would have made it clear, like, oh no, like this is a more universal experience. And so that's some of my favorite feelings to get from a movie is like seeing like, oh yeah, like this thing that feels really private and maybe even shameful is actually really common and other people feel it too. And so I wanted to, yeah, provide other audience members, no matter their age, no matter their sexuality, like a feeling of like that same kind of comfort and understanding.
Yeah, yeah. And now that the film is out in the world and it's traveled and it's played at festivals everywhere, how has the response impacted you? And have you had any reactions or stories from audiences that have actually stood out to you?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's impacted me. It's like so much because I'm just so touched by the fact that it moves people and that they can relate to it and that it seems to be like striking some of the chords that I really hoped it would. And I think like, talking to both like a 95-year-old man who said that he could relate to the movie to like, a 13-year-old kid who said that the movie had an impact on him. It's like all of that, it's like really encouraging that it can like speak to so many different people. And I think like people have come up to me and told me about like what it brought up for them, and that in some cases that it actually gave them a little bit of feeling of like peace about things that were more tortured from their past, particularly when it came to sort of coming out to themselves or coming out to other people. Like that's so meaningful because I think like anything from your past that can feel like just sort of like an unclosed sort of messy maybe failure, like anything that gives you a sort of fresher, more like forgiving perspective on that is like so meaningful to me as a viewer. So the fact that the movie could have done that for someone else really is huge.